Even though we're waiting for a couple more speakers, we're going to start. And I first would like to introduce, most of you know him already, but Dick Serre, who is a prominent chemist at Stanford University. He's a member of the board of directors of Molecular Frontiers, as well as on the scientific advisory board. So he is very graciously helping us today with this panel. And I want to say the past 2 days, we've listened to a number of incredible speakers who are all pushing the boundaries of extreme science. And it's clear from your talks that the parameters of these are ever-changing. Each of our speakers has provided valuable insights from the perspective of their respective disciplines. And so today, now, we're going to have a chance to ask them some more questions. But I just will start with a general question. And perhaps, Fred, you want to start with the answer, and then some of you involved.
Ask about the question?
Yeah. It seems from all that we've been hearing that there's a lot going on beyond our planet, but there's a lot that needs to happen on the planet. So what are some of the most important reasons you feel for exploring extreme environments today? So start with Fred, and we can move on.
Well, I think one of the great areas that hasn't been explored, maybe just a few percent, is the deep sea, and yet the oceans cover 70% of our planet. Most of that is quite deep, over 200 meters. The oceans, of course, figures very heavily in the future of the effects of global warming, and certainly marine populations as a food source in the future. And yet we've seen less than 5% of it. And in the United States and many countries, their oceanographic programs have, if anything, just decreased. There just doesn't seem to be any interest. And yet this is a wide open area for exploration, field science of all sorts. And it represents 70% of our planet. And it's incredible to me that we don't spend much more time learning about it.
Thank you. Yes?
I'd like to follow up on that. I agree that learning about deep-sea smokers, tectonic plate spreads is important. Particularly, I think, for, again, a search to this question, how do you go from non-life to life? And whether this question of non-life to life happened only once, or is it continuing to happen? Various questions of this sort that we need to try to look into. Now, Karl may comment on this. If you try to capture some of the microbes down there, you can't culture them when you bring them up to back to sea level. They have a lot of trouble, and yet we need to know so much more about what they're made of. And I think, in fact, let's go talk about something else. People are always talking about genetic diversity is an important thing, and they normally point to various furry animals that you can pet and fuzzy animals, but truth is the real diversity, from what I can tell, is in microbes.
There could be even there could be organisms which can only grow in the deep sea. I'm talking as a microbiologist
Yes.
about microbes, because equilibrium of the energy-yielding reaction is shifted to the right, and at the surface, at low pressures, they would never grow.
I have to disagree, though, on one point, and that's the fact that I've made dives with the Russians with the hydrothermal vents, and of course, you have these microorganisms coming out of these hydrothermal vents, and of course, they've been very useful in medicine because they can withstand high temperatures, and so this is not a new discovery, but certainly something being availed of in medicine.
Yeah, Laurie?
So I was going to propose another relatively unexplored territory, which is the boundaries between disciplines at academic institutions as a good place for people to explore. especially the young people in the audience. I think that what we're seeing, what you saw, I hope, over the last couple of days is this concept of the Earth as a habitable world, and as we use that to then think about the possibility of life elsewhere, there has been traditionally this great divide between biology and geology, for example, and those are the walls that people like Bob working on the Deep Carbon Observatory and others are really trying to break down, and I think there's so much knowledge to be gained by exploration at the boundaries of the disciplines. And so for those of you out there who are interested in these problems, work hard to try to break down those boundaries, which are in some cases quite strong at various academic institutions.
Bob, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think that when you think about deep time, we also learn about these boundaries. I'm always impressed in astronomy with how when we look at the night sky, we're seeing snapshots of stars at different points in their history, some just being born, some dying, some in comfortable middle age. When we look at exoplanets, we're seeing the exact same thing, except much more dimly because we can't characterize them. And yet we have on our own planet Earth, because of paleontological and geological information, we have snapshots of Earth through many, many different stages, through 4.5 billion years. And those snapshots show us that Earth has radically, dramatically transformed again and again and again, that Earth 100 million years and 1 billion years and 3 billion years were completely different planets from what we know today. And we need to think then of this life cycle of planets, and that's another way of thinking about how life and geology can coexist and what constitutes a habitable world.
Lynn, you're next.
Okay, well, I'll do the mirror image of the people at the deep sea. We know so little about what lives by the time you're a centimeter or two even off the ground. You know, what's in the air here, we know there's life up to about 70,000 feet or so, but we don't know much about it. We don't know much about the life in the clouds. We know vanishingly little. Most of the funding for that, and if you, the students in the room, if you don't know right now, funding is intimately tied with where the research goes. You know, most of that in aerobiology is for preservation of monuments or for disease right now, and almost nothing is going to understanding, you know, what's actually there, how high our biosphere goes. But while I have the microphone, I would also like to add to sort of this feeling that there are all these organisms out there that we can't culture, and therefore we can't know much about them. I'm on record in print. There is no such thing as an unculturable organism. That's not a biological phenomenon. It's a human failing. And, you know, we don't get paid these days to overcome those human failings. We get paid to run things through a sequencer.
That's right.
I'd like to comment, although this is far from my field, the one thing that has not come up thinking about organisms is the fact that there's this vast microbiome in us. So most of our cells are not our cells. They belong to this other body, this other ecosystem that's inside us. That's another extreme environment.
Yes.
I think one of the things that distresses me the most talking to young students is when I ask them, what are you majoring in? And I hear film studies, psychology, marketing. And I'm thinking, where on earth is that going to go? With all the challenges ahead of us, a part of everybody's education very definitely needs to be in the sciences.
But I think they can still pursue some of the other fields, right, Fred?
As long as they're using it to market science.
Yeah.
Not with my funding.
Okay, let me ask another question, and then we'll open to the audience, and I know the students have quite a few. Oh, please.
I would like to add one thing. During my research, I was thinking, could it be that there are even, I'm talking about microbes, aliens among us?
I think so.
We cannot see them because all life we detect with this genetic probes, environmental probes, and so this all they have the same principles in the tree of life. But could there be others which have landed, fell into the ocean or whatever, and began to grow, but we cannot see them because the probes do not react at all?
I think viruses are the aliens among us.
But they could even be reproducing, self-reproducing organisms. Who knows?
I mean, there's another way to detect organisms, and that's through the microscope. And no one has ever then gone on to test something they've seen through a microscope and not found it on this tree of life. So that's why I think that there's not a very high chance.
If these aliens are intelligent aliens, they would avoid the microscopes.
I have seen in the microscope very strange things. And
how late at night, Karl?
But I couldn't culture them.
I think we may even have an alien on this panel.
Okay, if you don't mind, we'll go to another question, and we can always come back to this. So I just wanted to ask you, for many of us, what has been presented over the last 2 days offers new information and ideas. Each of you are experts in your respective fields. And what would you say was the most important new concept that you might have learned from one of your colleagues during this symposium? Who wants to start?
Well, I'll say that I thought that the talk on the universe and the idea of combining these extremes, not just thinking of extreme mass or extreme velocity or extreme small or large, that the idea of looking at combinations, and then Lynn, you sort of echoed that when you talked about extremophiles, and once again, combining the extremes of pH and temperature, and begins to think about this multidimensional space that we have to all begin to think of, because our universe is not just temperature or just pressure or just mass or whatever. It's all these things at once, and suddenly you realize that this multidimensional problem gives you combinatorial richness that doesn't exist in any one dimension alone. I think that's very inspirational, and so I saw a definite link between these, what on the surface would have seemed as far apart as you can imagine two scientific talks, and yet speaking of the same phenomena.
Yes, I didn't, since I'm a physicist and not really a biologist in any sense, it was hard for me to see, what would be the appropriate things to talk about here. But since the theme of the whole symposium is the extremes, I interpreted it in my own way. Yeah. But now I have the microphone. I still want to make one remark concerning the previous observations. One thing that struck me here is that many of the people who gave talks here seem to take for granted that life has originated. Now, none of us knows how life could originate, because that's a very, very difficult question. So one time I was speculating about the possibility of humans sending robots to the outer world, and these robots being replicating robots, self-replicating robots. When you try to think about this topic, you find how extremely difficult it is to design a robot that can reproduce itself. Even if you know exactly what we want, it is extremely difficult. Now, nature did it all just by chance. That's what we call life. Life is just that nature just happened to have some molecules come by, and they happened to form some chains, and the chains made mirror images of those chains, and voila, there was life. It is such a difficult phenomenon that I find it very difficult to imagine that life, as you said, life originated many times. I find it a miracle that it originated even once. And I feel somewhat strengthened in that point of view, that the occurrence of spontaneous emergence of life is a very, very accidental and difficult to understand phenomenon by the well-known Fermi paradox, that if life originated, we see from the history of life on this planet that the line from microbes to intelligence is more or less a straight line. You see step by step a kind of evolution that could have taken place on any other planet as well, given the time, of course. So we know in roughly a time period of some 4 billion years, this can happen, and it could happen on other planets. Yet we see no sign from intelligent inhabitants of other planets who would have not perhaps come to us themselves, but they would have sent their robots, so why not? But we know there are no robots from intelligence. I disagree with that.
Based on what they've seen already, they probably have seen enough to discourage them from wanting to have any contact with us.
They would have absolutely no reason to leave. I mean, does the average cow in a meadow not notice the presence of humans? Of course they do. But the humans don't see that. We don't want to hide ourselves from those
Let me
so I don't think that. Yes, but one moment. For me, this was a reason to believe that the occurrence of life on any planet, even if the planet is very, very susceptible to life, it sits at the right spot, it has all the right chemicals, the right size, right atmosphere, right temperature, it's all there, yet it didn't develop life because these very special combination of circumstances didn't happen. So the things I missed in these talks is the opposite of the extremophiles, which is what is the most ideal place on any planet, in any world, for life to spontaneously generate, to emerge. And maybe those spots are more difficult to find than the extreme spots on other planets.
Mm-hmm. Let me suggest another possibility, though I do believe it could be that just what you said, it could be just a rare event. But imagine it's not that the conditions or whatever makes life still are around somewhere, like down below somewhere. Now that we have such a dominance of this life, my guess is the newly emerging life of whatever sort, which will be very primitive, will be eaten. It won't survive. So now, I don't know.
That seems to be fairly obvious. But now, life on this planet cannot emerge again.
Yes.
It only has to emerge once. And about the extremophiles, I'm strongly suspecting, although, of course, I have no proof of whatever kind, no good argument even, but I'm suspecting that these extremophiles originated from all the other life forms.
I think it's actually quite possibly the opposite. I think it's very likely that
the original place which was most ideal for life to emerge could be one of those extreme regions. I'm not contradicting that. One of those could have been just a very friendly, nice little pool with some frogs in there, which is spontaneously generated. Yeah. But it could have been one of these extreme regions, that's true. But life originated somewhere and then spread. And then it occupies every single niche it can find on this planet, including the clouds, including the deep ocean, including the volcanoes or what have you. So life will spread everywhere, but I find it very unlikely to be anything else. So to say that therefore in those extreme regions life can also develop is a very big questionable suspicion. It could be true, but I think the odds are rather strongly against it.
Okay. Thank you. Lynn next and then Ben.
Okay. I totally agree with you, but I never like to disagree with Dick, but the last couple of weeks I've begun to wonder whether that's true or not, because all life on Earth, for the most part that we know of, uses, for example, L amino acids and D sugars, with a few small exceptions. And so if you had a new life form evolving, for example, that was using D amino acids and was not digestible and then figured out how to let the rest of us know, don't eat me because it's not going to be worth it, you might be able to get a parallel life form that's occupying a totally different niche. What do you think? There's almost a question mark at the end of that.
Ben, do you want to?
Yeah. I would like to extend what Gerard said about once life has originated, it spreads rapidly all over Earth. Extend it to outside Earth. A member of this academy, Svante Arrhenius, he came up with a theory that he called panspermia. The idea being that the microorganism, a bacterium, could travel through space. He was not aware of the harsh cosmical radiation. So we have heard today several examples of how an organism could escape for quite some time strong cosmic radiation. And to that you could add various shieldings and so on. So I think it's conceivable that in the dust of a comet or something like that, you could let small cellular organisms migrate through the universe.
Yeah. Let me give a counter.
Let me finish first. So 7 years ago, literally on the back of an envelope, I just made for fun, on the same day as Albert Einstein filed his PhD thesis on diffusion, I made a little diffusion experiment, the random walk diffusion. And each step in the diffusion walk was a solar system. So I used the solar wind to move the bacterium, one step, and then randomly choosing a new direction. And very easily I could prove, if provided life originated after Big Bang, which I think is a reasonable assumption, that life could not, by such a diffusion process, have originated outside our galaxy. Okay, but it could have migrated from about 10 to the 11 solar systems within it. Now, having heard today that the extremes under which conditions life could exist are very, very wide, and having also heard that the conditions on Earth has varied a lot, we may open quite a large number of possibilities. Different planets, I think we all agree that they have not to be too big, and for the reason that we want a meteor coming in and spraying up all these particles. It should not have too strong gravitational field. Life could have originated on small moons or even on comets. The life we know today, which is only one form of life, assumes the presence of bulk water. That is very essential. The water is not the solvent. That's a byproduct of the property. The main property is that due to enthalpic interactions in the bulk and entropic effects, both of about the same contribution to the free energy, they give rise to a structuring of the life elements that is very peculiar to life. And it consists of three components. One is the nucleic acids that stack together by so-called hydrophobic interaction, which makes the hydrogen bonds that should recognize the genetic code isolated from the water, so they could have a good recognition. The second is the proteins that contain hydrophobic areas. They fold in such a way that they assume the right three-dimensional structure. And the third system is the hydrophobic molecules known as lipids that form the lipid bilayer membranes, which forms the bag around the cell. So I think we could discuss whether water is essential, but clearly we need a solvent that has similar properties of precipitating, not solving everything. Dick.
So what I wanted to say about panspermia is it only puts the problem somewhere else.
Yes.
And this is, and if you're really interested, I'm fascinated, the question, because I don't believe life started with the Big Bang. I believe it came after. You seem to agree to that. And therefore, you go somehow from non-life to life in some form. The other thing I would point out about life as we know it on Earth, and that tends to be our model of what we call alive, okay, is that it really uses phosphorus. Very essentially uses phosphorus. ATP is the currency of energy. We look at DNA and RNA, they all have phosphorus in them. Now there could be sulfur in place of phosphorus in some earlier models, but phosphorus I want to pay attention to. Where do you find phosphorus that you can use like this? You don't find phosphorus in the atmosphere worth anything. Okay, there are some gaseous phosphorus compounds like phosphine, but they're not going to be very stable in the atmosphere very long, I don't think. They're going to be broken apart by light as well. So don't worry about lightning in the atmosphere. It's making things happen that may add to it, but it still requires you to get the phosphorus. What about phosphorus in the ocean? Well, phosphates tend to be insoluble. Okay? Did Bob agree generally? I hope with that, I hope.
Not in the Hadean Ocean. It's very different. The chemistry of the Hadean Ocean actually facilitated the formation of di and even tri-polyphosphate.
I was going to lead to that you need heat and you need rocks. I really think it's life on the rocks that you start from, and with probably the presence of water close by. And that's what keeps leading me back to these smokers, why I'm so interested in looking and learning more about them.
Okay.
And other places.
If you don't mind, I'm going to open up to some questions from the audience. And since most of you ignored my question about each other's particular, please feel free to intersperse as you answer other questions in case something arises. So are there some questions from the audience? There's a couple in the back there. If you look way in the back and then about mid-level, there's a question as well.
I was going to ask about, because yesterday you talked about changing the periodic system because of the high pressure and such. And how would that new periodic system look like?
I believe that's one of the big challenges for us in this field. It is rather like where we were with chemistry a century ago, when we were just working out the periodic table in terms of the chemistry of the elements and then how you would understand that as quantum mechanics was being developed. Now we have a very different regime to look at with all of these problems in planetary interiors and astrophysics, where the elements are scrambled. We can't use our simple picture of how one thinks about an atom in bodies that are very dense with collections of nuclei and electrons, and how should we describe that in terms of the chemistry? So that's one of our big challenges. What does that dimension in pressure look like if we think about a three-dimensional periodic table?
Here again is combining extremes, the idea of Mendeleev's table being very static at one pressure and temperature. But if you add pressure and temperature as variables and maybe high magnetic fields or some other parameters that we discussed, you start having a multidimensional periodic table where each element itself has a multidimensional character. And I think that's one of the amazing frontiers and one of the amazing insights of some of this very recent high pressure work, that we suddenly realized we can tune elements. We can tune them to different characters and structures.
Thank you. Another question from the audience?
Yeah, so I have a question to Lynn Rothschild. So during your presentation about the universe, I started to wonder about life outside our solar system or even outside our galaxy. So I wonder, what's your trends on life on other planets, and how developed do you think the life could be?
You mean within our solar system?
Yeah, or outside our galaxy.
Well, within our solar system, we don't see anything on the surface right now. As I mentioned this morning, there's always the possibility beneath these ice-covered moons, like Enceladus and Europa, that you could have fairly large, I hate to use the word advanced life. I hate to use the word advanced life because all life is complicated, all life is advanced. So we don't see any surface life. There could be stuff under the surface. There could be things in hydrothermal vents and so on. Beyond the Earth, we just don't know. At this point, we're still just looking for bodies that could be potentially habitable. And so then the next question is, how can you tell if there's life there without having to actually go there? Because that's going to take a very long time. So we have a grad student coming in, and I know other labs have been very interested in the question of what you can tell by looking at the atmosphere of an extrasolar planet. So an idea that's been kicking around for a long time, I think it's Jim Lovelock's idea originally, was that if you were to be far off in our solar system or a different solar system and look back on the Earth, you would see an atmosphere that's 20% oxygen today and about 80% nitrogen. And this is a very unstable situation. It's not in equilibrium. And so the thought would be that there has to be some force that is keeping it out of equilibrium, and this force on the Earth is life. And so that one possibility is to start to look at the atmospheres of these extrasolar planets and look for some kind of disequilibrium like we have on the Earth as a way to indicate there might be life. The problem is we're not going to be able to go there in any near time. Does that help?
Yeah, but actually I was just wondering, outside our galaxy, do you think there are planets like Earth where there exist societies? Or
yes, there must be. There must be.
Yeah, I think the statistics. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did, while I had the microphone for a second, wanted to add on the panspermia. For people who don't know this in the room, there have been many missions over the years, satellite missions primarily funded by the European Space Agency, where organisms have been flown in Earth orbit, exposed to natural solar radiation as well as the vacuum of space to look for survival. And a few of them do survive, particularly Bacillus subtilis spores. We've flown some organisms in high salt crust that have survived in the vegetative state. So the whole question of panspermia also now has some experimental data behind it as well.
Yeah, but the time to exchange materials between the planets is very long. So we actually have examples of this because we have meteorites from Mars on Earth, we have lunar meteorites, but to get just from Earth to Mars, the sort of average time is a few million years. So that's the challenge, is that the timescales get very long very quickly when one tries to do a diffusion experiment like you discussed.
Are you talking about natural transfer or
Yes,
funding decisions by Congress?
No comment on Congress. Just want to add a brief thought here. So to me, the statistics become overwhelming when we have this conversation about the possibility of other Earth-like or even Earth-sized planets, Earth-sized or even Earth-like planets. Somebody showed the Hubble Deep Field image, but did not, I think it was you maybe, who did not really talk about it. But to me, this is just stunning, the statistics, right? So in the night sky that you look at here, it's almost all local stars, our Milky Way's stars, which has a couple of 100 billion stars just in our galaxy. And when you look at that Hubble, very famous Hubble image, you see thousands and thousands of points of light. Those are not stars, but galaxies. And each one of those has hundreds of billions of stars. And that is a piece of the sky that's, what, about as big as the eye of a needle? And so thousands and thousands of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars, most of which are an awful lot like our sun. Phenomenal. And that's just a teeny tiny piece of the sky. And so they're everywhere. So it just quickly becomes overwhelming to think that we would be the only place with a nice, happy place like Earth where and then this emergence of life becomes a very important question. How do you go from no life to life? How easy or hard is that? But I think it's a phenomenal statistical argument that you can make that there simply must be other solar systems with planets that are fairly similar to ours, because we're not made of anything special.
Right.
At what time can we ask a couple of wild questions here?
I thought we'd wait a little longer, but if you want to go ahead.
Well, I can't help but think that we talk about going to Mars, and there is a small segment of the population that are looking for a place to escape to once we destroy our present habitat. That's one of them. And then at some point, at the very end, I'd like to get into the prospects for the survival of our species.
Well, I don't think that needs to be at the very end. In fact, one of the questions I had for the panel was beyond food that we heard about, what do you feel are the biggest risks for the sustainability of our planet now?
Clearly asteroids hitting the Earth, for example.
Well, that I before coming here, I spoke with Kerry Mullis about what his biggest fear was for sustainability on the planet, and he actually said asteroids. So maybe some of you want to...
I just want to make a very quick comment that we don't need to worry about saving the planet. The planet is going to do very, very well without us. It has changed over and over again. Do you realize in the last million years that sea level has risen more than 100 meters and has fallen more than 100 meters 11 times in the last million years? Imagine a 100-meter change in sea level today. That's happened 11 times in the last million years alone. Earth changes. It always changes. It will change whether we do or do not do anything. So we don't need to worry about saving the planet. We need to worry about saving
our sustainability.
Yeah, our sustainability is very different.
Anyone else want to comment?
Well, other than asteroids, I think people.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, the asteroid thing is a real threat. It's interesting now. There's a lot of attention being paid to it, more than has been recently. I mean, it's definitely impacted the trajectory of life on Earth. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for asteroid impacts. So it can be a good thing, too, if you're a human. We do have the technology to potentially mitigate the threat if we choose to go out and do it. So I think it's a good thing to be focused on.
What we call human today, maybe in a million years, won't be we recognize as they were humans, and there'll be something else because we're also evolving.
Lynn, next.
And it all depends what sort of time scale. You know, as an astrobiologist, eventually we're going to have another supercontinent, and that's going to be an enormous problem, both in terms of climate and you know the Earth, but it's also in terms of humans, because you're going to now have very little coastland and an enormous amount of inland. And very little continental shelves. We're going to eventually hit the Andromeda galaxy. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are going to happen before the red giant phase. That's why I'm focusing on this post-red giant, you know, stellar remnant phase, because it's going to be a lot better after that.
Okay. I have a couple more comments on the panel, and then we'll move back to the audience. I think actually you're next.
Yeah, as for the asteroid impact, although that's a challenge, of course, if an asteroid would impact the Earth a few years from now, if it would be as bad as the one of 65 million years ago, the consequences nevertheless would be much less. Because now there are humans, and some humans will survive, I mean, just like some dinosaurs survived. But now we have the ability to keep living organisms under controlled conditions and to plant them back on Earth after the sun continues, goes back to shining again. And those options the dinosaurs didn't have. So they were facing a much bigger tragedy than today, because now there are humans who could mitigate the problem. Okay. So of course it will still be a disaster that's uncomparable to anything else that happened to humanity so far. But the odds are very small. I think that the odds for other disasters like nuclear war or something are quite a bit bigger. So,
Bob, please.
Yeah, I would just like to tie some of those points together with the, sort of the broader question that I'd like to put to sort of the next generation, and that is the whole question of what you do about the natural variations in climate and with asteroid impacts. And this really is the question of what do you do with geoengineering. I mean, geoengineering is out there as a concept that will allow us to have some sustainability, but it's a very, very complicated thing to look at, because you've got this enormously complicated system of feedbacks. And when you start monkeying with one part of the system, you're going to look and find changes elsewhere. But if you don't do anything, then you have this problem of sustainability, whether it's climate change, like Bob described, that could happen naturally, or the anthropogenic part, or asteroid impacts, a whole range of geophysical or astrophysical phenomena, and the question is, what do we do about that? And how do we look at that in terms of the science and also philosophically in a moral sense? What do we protect?
Thank you. I'm going to ask for you to ask your question now, please.
Yes, it's about high pressure chemicals that they change the chemical properties. I'm wondering what's the potential for having these high pressure chemicals? They get different properties. What's the potential for us, or if they keep these different chemical properties in normal pressure? So if we make these different chemicals, would they keep the same form? Or if all of them didn't, then where's the limit? Which of the compound elements could we say these would keep the form, this would not?
That's actually an excellent question, and that's really at the forefront of our science right now. We are discovering more and more materials that can be recovered from extreme environments to become potentially useful. Superconductors, super hard materials, electronic materials. The poster child of those materials is the mineral, diamond, which is a high-pressure mineral. It shouldn't be stable on the surface of the Earth, but it is, and it has these wonderful, wonderful properties that have important applications in technology. How many other materials like that shouldn't be stable on the Earth thermodynamically on the surface, but are? And we're making more and more of those.
Another question from the audience? Okay, way in the back.
Yes, my question is to Dr. Fedoroff regarding the sustainability of our food production. Now, obviously, a lot needs to be done if we want to be able to feed everyone. For example, we need to double our food supply by 2050. And do you think these goals are feasible? And how do you think we can get people to wake up about this issue? Because I'm afraid that a lot of the naysayers aren't interested in the facts. They just want to be naysayers.
Yes, I think it is feasible. What is it going to take to wake people up? That's really the difficult one. Everyone can get sick, but we now have a global food supply. And if you have money, you will secure food. That's really the tragedy of the billion starving people. They don't have the access to the money, because if you have access to money, you can have the food. supply chains notwithstanding. Cokes are available in on every corner of the earth. But what will it take to get people to recognize that they need to invest more in that area and to actually use modern science to increase the food supply? And I don't have an answer for that. One could say a global food crisis, but gosh, we've had that. We've gone into a higher regime of food costs. In Western developed societies, a very small fraction of our income goes to food, even as there are literally billions of people on the face of the earth who spend the vast majority of their money on food. So I don't see where the magic bullet is. Will we, I think that a rather famous, a person who has become famous for coining the term tragedy of the commons also wrote an article, his name is Gerard Harden, titled, "No One Ever Dies of Overpopulation," or something very close to that. We have wars, we have destabilizing social situations. Human societies are the most complicated systems that we know, and they crash. We're seeing some of that in the world today. When does it become global? I don't know. If you watch the news, you're alarmed to see the Middle East unrest spreading. These are the things that actually in the short term concern me more. All of my colleagues here have very global, very, very long-term perspectives. And certainly the Earth will survive. But will society? And I don't have a question. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. Because these are complicated problems. We don't know how we really come to belief structures, but what we do increasingly appreciate is that people are driven by belief structures, not by scientific facts. So very often people turn around and say, well, you scientists don't explain well enough. Frankly, when you have a fear-driven belief system, pardon? Yeah, there's no such thing as explaining well enough. There isn't. You can pile the facts as high as you want, but it doesn't change people's minds. Now, understanding how we work psychologically is step one, but changing that is going to be even more difficult because people are very resistant to psychological manipulation. And that's some of the answer. I was being questioned over lunch about obesity. It's nice to blame it on the food companies, but all you can blame them for is for getting good at knowing what we like, what we evolved to treasure, which is sweet stuff and salty stuff and fatty stuff.
Can I follow up on this?
We're somewhat victims of our own evolution.
In dissecting this a little better, a little deeper, I should say, maybe. If we look at the people's knee-jerk reaction to nuclear power, we can identify some causes, right? We know about atom bombs, and we've had some accidents. Is there something of this sort that's causing people's knee-jerk reaction to GMOs?
No. Because in the case of nuclear power, there are real quantifiable risks. After almost half a century, the risks of GMOs remain hypothetical. No one has produced evidence, in spite of the occasional bizarre publications. I referred to one of them recently where a researcher in France took mice that normally develop tumors and grew them for 2 years, allowed them to survive for 2 years, which is generally frowned upon, and then made pictures and showed them on the internet, and this is what GM foods cause. So we
Jurassic
have that, and frankly, these things have a huge effect on people, and they're extremely hard to undo. GMOs aren't the first thing. I mean, back when smallpox vaccination were introduced, there were cartoons of people turning into cows because, I kid you not, and they were reputed to cause illness, to cause impotence. That's always a favorite. So were the Green Revolution strains. This seems to be a constant, going even farther back when coffee was first introduced, because people would gather and drink coffee and not get drunk. The powers that be were dead set against coffee introduction. Again, it was reputed to make you sick and cause all kinds of damage. So this seems to be a constant in our history.
Thank you. Liam, do you want to?
Couldn't you say that in some way something that's really happened with, or a real concern with GMOs could be something analogous to invasive species, though? Like how, to me, I think that some of that might be driving some of the worry in that you have these invasive species that you just move from another continent, and because it's from outside and it's not part of the ecosystem that's been there for an extended period of time, that it can throw things out of balance. And
but there is no balance in agriculture, number one. Number two, we have been domesticating. We have been, all of domestication is about defanging the ability of crops to do exactly that. So invasive species are not analogous to adding a single gene, which is a protein coding sequence or a nucleic acid coding sequence, to an existing plant. A corn plant with an extra gene is a corn plant with an extra gene. It is not an invasive species.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Professor Rothschild is leaving us, so let's thank her for her wonderful contribution today.
Let me just say there is nothing more fun in the world than to be a scientist.
Thank you. Okay, do I have any other? Oh, please go ahead.
There's an aspect to this whole food problem that I'm sure many people would like to consider, which is you just observe that in a question of a century or so, human population increased from 1 billion to 6 or 9 billion. And my question then is, what was the cause of that? And wasn't one of the causes the plenty availability of food, besides, of course, living space and so on? But you can ask, what would be the way to keep the human population under control? Now, giving you less food is not a good thing.
Bent, I guess you're next.
For interrupting here. I just want to thank Dina, who is leaving now, Dina Petranovic-Nielsen, who is behind all this. And I think we should give her a hand. Without her...
Okay, so let me answer that question. The demographic trends that will stabilize the population are already in place. Okay? Sweden's own Hans Rosling is a genius of explaining the demographic trends, and the population will stabilize. So it's not going to go out of control exponentially. People's behaviors have already changed, reproductive behaviors. In part, that's urbanization. Why did it explode? Primarily due to improved germs were discovered and how to control them. So sanitation and increasing food supply because people began to understand that there was nothing magical about plants. They needed certain chemicals, and artificial fertilizer has made a huge difference. Without artificial fertilizer, without figuring out how to break the nitrogen bonds, right, and convert it to forms that plants use, we couldn't support the current population.
Let me just say, those who don't know who Hans Rosling is, look up Gapminder.
Oh, no, look up Hans Rosling and the Magic Washing Machine. That's a TED Talk.
Yeah. Yes, it's very good.
Yeah, last year I had Hans Rosling at year before last at the AAAS meeting. It was spectacular.
Yeah, he was here last year.
I guess I've heard two things I don't agree with. One is that people can't be psychologically manipulated.
Who'd you hear that from?
Somebody said it a minute ago, and
think
people can be all the time.
They don't like it.
The other thing I don't believe is that population is just going to stabilize it on its own. Right now, it's really ramping up. I don't have a blind faith that it's going to somehow steady out. That sounds like a government position,
No,
not
it's
something that's really going to happen.
It is happening. Sorry.
And what is slowing down population growth then? Tell me that.
People's behaviors. Again,
Oh.
look up Rosling. Rosling is a genius at explaining not theories, but actual demographic trends.
Fred, if you had been at last year's conference, you would have seen that the population is stabilizing.
I still don't believe it.
Okay.
You may not believe, but that's a belief. Okay?
It has to do with number of children.
Evidence and people's behaviors.
Moon is made of green cheese.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
I was thinking about, since you said that we have to increase the food production, and another problem is also that the food doesn't always go to the people that need it. So if you produce more, will that also mean that people who need it also get it? Or will the people that already eat a lot, will they just get more food?
That's a little bit what you were saying earlier, right?
I think the issue is poverty more than it is the amount of food on the face of the earth. I probably presented a largely oversimplified picture. There are certainly areas without increasing food supply. You could increase the amount of food that is available to people simply by decreasing the amount that's wasted in developed countries and increasing the amount that survives long enough to get to market in developing countries. So there's enormous wiggle room in this equation. The question is eradicating poverty, and that has been an extremely stubborn problem. All of the developed countries' aid efforts have not changed an awful lot. I think that the keys, if you look at the history of countries that came from really poverty status to wealth or much better places, I'm thinking of places like Brazil. That's a very recent example. But the U.S., 150 years ago, the progression is very similar. It's about education, it's about agriculture, it's about investing in agriculture, and it's about education and research. So those are the key elements. The U.S. system for the land-grant university system was absolute genius. It was about bringing science to farmers. And that still is the name of the game. The way that it's delivered is changing, but eradicating the problem of poverty is about education, about access to resources. And probably the most promising development is the spread of cell phones. We don't use them very effectively. We still have language barriers. We have enormous educational resources, but mobilizing them for poor countries is not yet a reality. And the consequences for not doing it are often not connected with the causes. And the consequences are that we have enormous migrations of poor people looking for better lives elsewhere. And we don't connect that with our failure to increase the ability of the access of people to education and resources.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, way in the back there.
I don't either. I have two of them.
See who comes first.
Hi. As scientific perception crosses great distances and looks deeply, ever more deeply back in time and into small linear scales, I'd like to ask the panel, what of the scientific perceptions inform how you think we might better organize society? How would you bring these insights in deeper and smaller scale scientific perception into thoughts about how we can better organize society?
I'm going to ask Dick, if you don't mind starting, be the first to try to answer this.
I find this a difficult question and don't know for sure what to say to answer you. But I'm going to again go back to what we see that seems to matter the most in transforming society is investing in education of the young people.
There's education, education, and education.
Okay. We haven't heard very much from you. Yes, you want to answer?
I think it's a difficult question. I mean, it's education, but it's also not just a question of education. I think part of what we're trying to do here is actually mobilizing people to actually go, taking the first step, actually going out there and saying, well, you can actually do science, you can go out and do physics, mathematics. If you want to be an astronomer, that's the right direction you have to go. But it's not just, I mean, it's not just getting people motivated in the classrooms, but it's actually also the general public. And I think that's...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there's been a change over the last 10 years in the rhetoric that some people who are very good at this have used. 10 years ago, we talked about outreach. Scientists had to engage in outreach as if we're somehow taking our wisdom and granting it to the great unwashed public out there. It's now much more about engagement, and I think that that's more than just a change in words. I think we realize that we have to listen to a non-scientific public. They do have real concerns. They read Jurassic Park. They see the movies about genetic engineering. They get false impressions. And they're not stupid people, but they also have not been schooled in the details of molecular genetics. And so many of these questions, they don't want us just to tell them what to think. They want us to engage with them in a conversation in which we listen as well as talk.
Russell?
And that's, in my experience, can I jump?
If you don't mind, if Russell could speak next, and then I'll come to you.
Well, I would just like to add that the outreach and the education is really part of, in a sense, a broader kind of dialogue. There's a process of inquiry, of curiosity, of agreeing and disagreeing, and you're seeing that here on this panel. Science is not some monolithic, dogmatic entity. It's alive, it's full of debate. We're not agreeing on a lot of points here. And for us in the States, that's a challenge to get that across, that that's how society should be built. And the challenge is to put policy on top of that, recognizing that there isn't going to be a uniform view of the scientists, but there's a process in place that is what we need to go forward with any kind of democratic society.
Okay, please go ahead. Would you like to speak?
Oh,
yeah?
I thought somebody else wanted. Go ahead. No, the thing that puzzles me, the kind of engagement you're talking about is very successful, very labor intensive, and converts a person at a time, if you're lucky. And yet, what we've seen recently in many different spheres is a rumor will get started, especially if it's a scary rumor, and it'll flash around the world. Now, what do we do about that? How do we understand human beings and counter that? I don't know, except that the most hopeful thing I've seen recently, I had the fortune of getting something called the Nevada Prize. And in the course of the festivities, a good deal was asked of the awardees, including going to schools and interacting with students. And I went to a school in Las Vegas, of all places. It's called the Sandy Miller School. It's an international baccalaureate school, and all based on science. The whole curriculum goes around science. I've never seen such a bunch of engaged kids. They were not specially selected. It's a public school. It's entry by lottery, but all the curriculum is around science. And one of the teachers told me that the kids the first grade kids had a dripping faucet, and they recorded the frequency of the drips, and they graphed them, and they brought in the maintenance guy, and showed him the graphs of the frequency of the drips. So kids can learn how to do experiments very early on, and then they don't lose that enthusiasm. It can be done, but we're not doing it.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was going to say just briefly, is that I think there's something about the people who grow up to be scientists who have not lost that innate curiosity that I believe all kids have. All kids experiment. All kids ask questions. Good questions, some better than others, but then something about the way that our society indoctrinates them into being larger human beings is taking that out of a huge fraction of the population. And I think that as a result, we don't ask for evidence-based reasoning in our decision-making, and we don't feel comfortable with debate in the way that scientists do. And I think if society could learn something from science, it's that. How do we keep that curiosity and that engagement and that ability to question without dismissing?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, the question I have about this, something which mystifies me very much, is that even in a relatively well-educated country like the United States, you still see, particularly in the Midwest, you see this religious fanatism surfing and not going away. Quite to the contrary, they are only strengthened in their view. It's often also somewhat anti-science, so your concerns about the resistance against genetic modification is just one sign of that. Yeah, but also the general idea of that, the feeling against evolution in general. They teach that God made everything and nothing evolves, that's just a mistake. And in the meantime, they have this this notion that man should not interfere with nature. Well, you know the arguments, I presume.
Yeah, I have a feeling that those two are related.
Yes, and so
education.
But you think education is related to religious extremism?
I think the decline of the.
But it's not declining. That's my problem.
Yeah, it is.
If you don't mind, why don't we ask Leroy, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Here's somebody who has taken science and become something of a dream for many young people and people like me. And so maybe you could talk about some of your motivators that brought you into this field. And
well, sure. After lunch today, actually, I was talking with Tim, and we were talking about ways to inspire kids and get them excited about science and about thinking about their goals. And oftentimes you can point to one or a series of events or people who had an enormous influence on your life in one way or another. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to do is go out and try to inspire people, get them thinking about what they want to do, and try to be one of those people that can help to change a young person's life, get them start thinking about what they want to do, give them some confidence, be a mentor, basically. I think that's a big part of it.
Fred?
I just want to make a point. For 5 years, I ran the Westinghouse Science Talent Search and the International Science and Engineering Fair, and I was the only American judge at the European Union Fair, and was a permanent judge, Denmark and Norway. And I was pessimistic about our youth until I got in there. And then the science fairs have been growing, and they're absolutely wonderful, and they've had a profound effect on these young people, particularly when they've reached down below high school into junior high school. And I've been particularly pleased by interdisciplinary projects, even on an international basis. And so there's quite a bit of hope there, and it's an area in which we can all take part and get into, and you can have a profound effect, not just one-on-one, but with many young students. And I think we all remember a teacher or an adult that said one key word to us that made all the difference in the world. And on the other hand, you have to be so very careful about not discouraging anybody or saying that thing that'll shut them down or turn them off.
Shugang, do you have a...
Yes, this meeting is about extremes. So far, everyone learned about the life. as Ben has summarized, is nucleic acids, which is DNA. Everybody shares the same. And peptides, no, not peptides, lipids, everybody shares the same. The third is the proteins, the amino acids. If you can find some other organism, then don't use one of them. That would be a truly extraordinary discovery. Doesn't matter here on Earth or elsewhere. So the young people, and they should continue to ask questions. I totally agree with Fred, you have said earlier. And when you ask the young people what do they study, accounting, marketing, economics, and film studies, and that is great human endeavor. However, with increasing complexity society, that will not generate new knowledge. And for scientists, we do is generate new knowledge. That's actually one of the MIT mission is that. And then to translate knowledge into technology. That's what we do here. And eventually use the knowledge and technology to develop a new economy. Look at the food production, look food security. It's important for human society, for civilization. We have seen collapse, many societies, then if overpopulated, then just not controllable for this overpopulation. I totally agree with Nina. So over the last 50 years, food production has increased, but population increased even higher. I wonder if human is as smart as bacteria. So bacteria has a log phase, very slowly growing, and then going to log phase. That's what human is doing now. And then eventually tear off. Overpopulation, eventually the whole system collapses. I wonder if a human will be smart as bacteria and will control our population. I'm not so sure about that. And then now we talk about the control population turning off Hans wrestling. I just came from China last week. If you give young people a chance, as soon as government left the one-child policy, people have 3, 4, 5 children. Okay. That because government have a lid on this one-child policy has worked pretty well. India has no control. And I wouldn't be surprised in 10 years, India population overgrow. It's unfortunately food security for them, it does not exist. So I'm really worried about the science technology. Scientists have to get young people stimulated, not just study economy and marketing and so on, make money quickly. And you really study mathematics. As you said earlier, young people are very curious, but they lose curiosity about 8 and 9 and 10 and so on. In junior high school, not in elementary school, but junior high. That's exactly what Ben had in mind in 2005 and or earlier to set up the Molecular Frontiers Foundation for exactly this purpose, to stimulate young people to continue to sustain their curiosity, study math and science and so on. You're here, I think everybody agree. This is one of the best symposium we have had. And you stimulate so many young people that now want to do more. Probably they want to now change their major to study science rather than study marketing and so on. So truly thank you for giving fantastic lectures, so diverse, but so exciting. So I'm sure I'm not the only one inspired, but also young people got inspired as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes? Okay, please, in the back.
I just wanted to tie back into how to motivate young children to do science. I just read in the Swedish paper today, actually this morning, how the applications to the math-heavy programs in the 6 largest universities in Sweden are up by over 20% in the last 3 years. And it's explained by the fact that the term nerd has a much higher status now than what it used to. And I think it's really important for scientists to do the kind of outreach where it's shown that it's actually really cool to be a nerd in this circumstance.
Thank you.
Right, The Big Bang Theory, super famous TV show, everybody loves it. It's cool to be a nerd.
That's what it takes. Laurie, how about this young man on the front row? Do you have any questions, young man?
The question I had actually asked during the break because I have an allergy to dust, and I was wondering just what the cosmic universal dust was. I really actually didn't know. And so I asked a couple of people and found out it wasn't something that would give me allergies if, in fact, I should end up in that location. But there is one thing I should tell you. You may have missed the last election in the United States for president, and there hasn't been much said about government and government's role. And I think China is a greater example of your issue of food production than anywhere else and feeding people. Deng Xiaoping fed the entire country. No other human has done that in his lifetime. But the Republican Party had 6 candidates up on the podium. They were being asked questions, and one of the questions they were asked was on creationism. Who believes in creationism? And 5 out of the 6 raised their hand. 5 out of the 6 people running for president of the United States believe that the world began in 4004 BC. And they even knew the time, the exact time. So, you know, the state of politics, I think, has a tremendous influence in all the things you're talking about, but I haven't heard much of the interplay between those two.
I think that's a good point, and maybe we can ask our panel, what do you think we can do about this?
So I have one. So if you look at and again, this is a U.S. perspective. One, first of all, none of those people won, so we got that going for us, thankfully. But 535 members of Congress, the number that are scientists or engineers, you can count on one hand. And so, and the number who are lawyers would be frightened. Yeah.
And just decreased by 1.
Yeah, right. So I think part of our challenge as scientists is to show our students that there are other career paths, even with a degree in science, with a mind of a scientist. Doesn't mean you have to be a practicing scientist. I think that's one of the challenges in the academic side that we face, is to make sure our students see other paths. I would love to see more scientists in Congress. I would love to see more scientists in leadership roles outside of science. This is a way, again, for us to connect to broader society and make sure that the kind of open-minded, evidence-based approach to problems that scientists take can be infused more broadly in society.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just one remark. Angela Merkel is the counterexample. She is a physicist and quite successful as a political leader as well. So maybe because she has a scientific mind of her own.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to say that one of the really impactful programs in bringing science into Washington has been the AAAS Fellows Program. And I really, for all the Americans in the audience, and actually we've had some Europeans apply to that program successfully. It's basically a 1 or 2 year fellowship that brings people to Washington. The AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They have a website. All you have to do is Google AAAS. And they're science policy fellows. They work in all branches of government, everybody, and they form a community of their own. And you make lifelong friends, and it's a terrific experience, and people, a serious fraction of them end up in Washington in policy positions. That's the good news.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of the idea when we were putting together this concept of this conference was to show young people and others that science does offer so many different fields, and people are doing so many different things, not just in the laboratory, but far beyond. So that was part of the purpose behind this particular program. So, other questions?
I'd like to ask a scientific question. Well, according to the thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. And I'd like to ask if this will be, if energy will be transformed forever, or it will eventually reach a stable state and not be transformed anymore.
I couldn't quite catch the question you have here. Energy is absolutely conserved locally, but while the universe expands, the equations are a bit more complicated, but basically there's a conservation of energy. Then there's the other notion called entropy, which can very roughly be characterized as the amount of disorder in the universe, which continues to increase. Once you have a gas where you can no longer localize any of the atoms, that situation will stay in a certain quantifiable sense. That's called entropy. That slowly increases in the universe, which also means the universe can never contract it to go into its original state before, as it was before, because the entropy can only increase and not decrease. So the universe will be different in any way. But as the situation looks today, the universe seems to continue to expand. In fact, it accelerates its expansion. It expands faster and faster and faster due to forces of nature which we can write on the back of an envelope quite easily, but you don't really understand why that force is there. But there is a universal force everywhere in the universe that makes it expand. And as things look right now, this will continue forever. Forever meaning many, many billions of years. There are certain theories about quadrillions of years. That's other things might happen, nobody knows. But the universe seems to expand. And that's the one thing we can say for sure right now. And while it does so, the average energy decreases, so the universe does cool down. Stars, they discontinue shining, they shine less and less energy because they burn up all the internal nuclear fuel. So the universe also cools down for that reason, but also just by expanding, just when the gas expands, it also cools down. For the same reason, the universe cools down by expansion. And so that means that the energy available per particle or per planet slowly decreases for that reason.
Okay, anybody else? No. Okay, one there in the middle.
Yeah, I have a question. It's like a follow-up to what she said. You said that entropy increases, right? But, I was just wondering, like, isn't living organisms sort of like a lower state of entropy? And in that case, how does that, as we were speaking about before, how does that begin if entropy always increases?
Well,
now, Schrödinger first thought that, and
but that question was answered very briefly, I think, by one of you, that a living being is not an isolated system. Yeah. So only in an isolated system, well, equilibrium is not really necessary. In an isolated system, entropy can only increase. But you can also, breathe away your entropy, or you can cool down by sweating, by transpiring, and so you can lose your entropy in many ways. The rest of the world around us catches that energy, but then it's radiated out into the universe eventually. In other words, living organisms are not at all a counter-example of the laws of nature. Quite to the contrary, living organisms obey all laws of nature, of physics. Yes.
Let me give you a simple example. In a refrigerator, we turn water into ice, which is more ordered. But if you put your hand in the back of the refrigerator, you feel the heat coming out, which is very disordered. There's more disorder going on than ordering.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I want to ask the panel, do you have any questions for our audience?
A question for audience. I have a question for another panel member.
Okay, you can go ahead with that.
I was very intrigued by hearing about nanoarchaea. And I wondered, in what sense were they like a virus? And what I'm asking is, should I call them alive, or should I call them dead, or should I call them something in between? They need, it seems, another cell to do something, or to survive. Everything needs a certain environment to survive. But so I'm trying to understand how you look at this, and I wanted to ask you that question.
Good point. It has its own ribosomes, and it's never in a virus. And it has a cell membrane, and so it can be killed, for example, by excessive heat, by autoclaving, and then it has a membrane potential, which is built up possibly by the ATP it was stealing from its host. But this makes a difference to a virus. But it's, of course, it's a good point. Sometimes I thought maybe it's a virus on the opposite, on the way, becoming a real organism.
Right.
And this is still not clear, so it's still a
fascinating
research option.
Parasites do that a lot. They jump overboard a lot of
But it's not a simple parasite because it has no. Parasites always have hundreds of pseudogenes, you know. They cut down the genes. A lot of genes become unfunctional because they are parasitic on its host. But this nanoarchaea has not one pseudogene. Other parasites have hundreds of pseudogenes. And also in parasites, normally you always find free living organisms there, relatively. This organism we cannot find a free living relative so far, at least. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question following up on what you were just talking about. I thought I saw in one of the images of one of the archaea a flagella, and if that were the case, then that would have occurred somewhat prior to any endosymbiotic theory where flagellas were originally thought to be created, at least in some recent thinking. And so that would seem to make it to me be a fairly living process. But the other thing is, if that were true, and it did have a flagella, has anybody looked at their motion, their response to light, their response, you know, things like that?
It's on the way at the moment, and they act in a different way than the bacterial system. So the flagella, some of them do not rotate, but they are almost like a eukaryotic flagellum. They are flexible, but this is at the moment under investigation, and also the engine, the motor for the flagellum is a different construct in archaea than in bacteria. While there are also hyperthermophilic bacteria, so it's not a matter of high temperature, but it's a matter of in which domain of life this organism belongs to. Yeah.
Okay.
So the high temperature bacterium has the same engine and the same flagellum, similar flagellum, also heat stable as in the mesophilic in the low temperature range.
Okay, Fred, you're next.
I think this is just the group I want to ask this question, looking at the various disciplines. What is your feeling? Is time travel going to be possible either into the future or into the past?
Well, the only form of time travel is just be patient and you'll be in the future automatically. But there's all other forms of time travel are science fiction.
We have a question right there in the middle.
Hello, hi. I had a question. Why should we explore other planets and other potential life forms if the human race is in such a fragile state right now? And wouldn't you agree that the best thing for mankind right now is to focus on science to improve food sustainability than focus on life forms, potential life forms on Mars?
Leroy, start.
Yes. Sure. I think as with anything that you'll find in life is the important thing is a balance. And so if you're talking about spending money, government spending money, the important thing is that you have balanced spending. So of course, if you look at, say, the U.S. budget, the amount of money that we spend on space exploration is actually very, very small. It's typically been, except for the Apollo days, typically been right around 1% or even less of the total U.S. budget. And so you have the impression that we're spending a lot on space exploration, but we're actually getting a lot out of that for the very small amount we're spending. Not only are we satisfying human curiosity in exploration, again, I think we're the most important part of that mission is inspiring the next generation, like you young people in the audience here, and your younger siblings, and and then there are the practical parts too, the technical spin-offs that the space program drives. All the advances in the acceleration of technology development, and finally, we get we get so much out of the jobs that are created, you know, that we have people inspired to go study science and engineering because they want to work on these cool projects. They want to work on the rover that's going to Mars. They want to become an astronaut and get to go fly into space. They want to try to be the first person to be the first person to set foot on Mars. I think all those things are important, and you're getting so much out of the small amount of the budget that we're spending. The other issues that you bring up are very important, and proportionally, there's a lot more money being spent on things like defense and the combined social programs of a country like the United States.
I know there's a number of other comments, but let's please thank Dr. Fedoroff, who's leaving now, so thank you. Okay, you want to go next, and then Laurie, I think you have a...
Sure, and it's important to have a balanced research portfolio, but I'd imagine yourself back more than 200 years when if the governments of the time said, we want to have a program to invent a much better source of light, because that's critically important to our societies, it's for safety at night, it protects people, you probably wouldn't have studied frogs' legs. But Luigi Galvani's study of frog legs led directly to Volta's invention of the battery, which led to the understanding of electricity, electromagnetism, of the laws that now allow us in a society to have the benefits of electrification. We simply cannot guess in science the things we don't know. And so if we only tackle applied problems from a very narrow human perspective, we're going to miss all the really great discoveries which will transform society in ways that we cannot imagine right now.
Well said. It really is important, and it's hard to get that across, I think, that idea across to politicians who want to see a return for their investment. Yeah. And yet the biggest return may come from things which will happen later in time, and many politicians unfortunately only have a 2-year time window that they look at, or even less because they're running for election again. It's hard.
Laurie, you had a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. The way I like to talk about this is, so the Curiosity rover somebody asked me out in the hall, cost $2.5 billion US dollars. So that's about the cost of a movie ticket per person in the US. So, you know, so when you say it like that, it doesn't sound like so much. But it's not that we took $2.5 billion and stuck it on the top of a rocket and launched it into space, right? So that money is spent for paying people to do good, high-tech work, the kinds of jobs that we want people to have in our country, the kinds of jobs that spur innovation and spin-offs and new discoveries that, again, we cannot always predict how they will impact us. You know, great breast cancer imaging coming from algorithms used to process Hubble images. So there are many examples like this. So I think as a nation, we need to look at how we spend our money in a diversity of ways, that all of which can guide us towards a better society. And I think it's fair to argue about the balance between those, but I think that this is one. And I also would flip out on its head and say, it's very hard to think about, but imagine a world where you have no Hubble, or you have no Curiosity rover, or you have you know, other kinds of fabulous fundamental research. You have no CERN, you have no Higgs boson. It's a sadder place somehow. I think it's part of what it is to be human, to be able to ask almost unanswerable questions and try to answer them. Okay. And to me, that's a part of what being human is all about.
I agree. I just want to, if anybody's willing to do this in the audience, would you mind making a comment on what you got out of this conference over the last couple days? Is there anyone who's willing to say something?
Laurie, I'd just like to actually pitch that in terms of the last question. So how do you all feel about this tension between applied research and fundamental research and looking for the big questions as opposed to the pressure to do something for society and even other pressures that you feel that might take you away from science? So how do you feel about that?
Phoebe and Liam, why don't you try?
Well, for one thing, growing up sort of in a scientific family and taking biology courses, it's a little weird to have heard a lot of the names of, okay. So having heard the names of a lot of you all and hearing about the Nobel Prize, actually being here in Stockholm and meeting and hearing and being able to talk to sort of people who I've always looked up to is really incredible and something that I'm still processing and still feels a little surreal. So that's really incredible for being an inspiration and showing that I think it can sometimes be intimidating to go into the field of science and think that you have to have it all figured out and have right now sort of your plan and your trajectory and specialty. So a couple of people, including Dina who's left, but have sort of mentioned that it's a lot more exploring as you go and doing the next thing that's the most exciting and working from there. And that's been really nice and refreshing and comforting to hear too.
Thank you.
Ditto. I guess going to the, are you asking about just basic research versus?
You can answer it however you feel best.
I would agree with Phoebe for everything about this conference, for sure. Also, I have always been interested in science, and this is just an incredible experience to be able to be here and go to the Nobel Museum and see everything and talk to you, talk to everyone here on stage.
Well, thank you. We only have a few more minutes, so...
I would like to ask a question to you, which could guide us in how we will continue these exercises. I presume all of you are nerds. That's my impression. You are very interested in science, but you are not those people who want to play football just now. They have made their preferences already. Would they be a suitable audience for us? Do you think there is a mechanism by which we can bring in not just students but also other people? Because I think it's important that not only those who are extremely interested in science but also the society as such become aware of what science can do. Science is actually useful. And I think this is exactly what we could convey. But if there is a prejudice, which I fear there is, we won't see the people whom we could speak with, right? So I would like to hear from somebody. You know your friends at school and so on, and you would probably see that, oh, they would think this would cool, just if they knew, right?
Well, I have to say, I know a lot of jocks who really dislike all biology, but as soon as they start taking their protein powders and shakes before working out, they get very into sort of metabolism and different molecules. So I think as much as sort of there's a push against applied sort of fields, if you find the right applications, you can draw in people who otherwise would be very turned away from science. So if you show sort of a facet that's specific to people, and then lure them in that way, and then throw the theory at them, that might work.
That might even work on politicians.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, I think many of my friends would probably have a problem with understanding what many people, some of the terms and stuff that any of you professors used in your presentations, because if you study chemistry and biology and stuff, you understand what you're saying. But I think many of my peers who maybe are not as interested in the scientific lingo would follow. That's probably one of the problems if you would invite those people.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about if you want to do. Should I put it? Yeah, thanks. If you want to do science, let me have a comparison. Football, you could just take the ball, get some friends to go out to play football. When you have science, often you need resources, and that is very difficult to get compared to football or other subjects, or other things. So that might be a factor, actually, that it's not as easily reached. Mm-hmm. So making it more easily reached might be an option to increase to encourage people.
Okay. Thank you. Shigan?
Maybe I should tell you my personal story. I'm very curious, okay? And so what the curiosity have led to is a $1 billion company as yesterday or today. So in 1990, I was study Z-DNA binding protein, how protein bind the left-hand DNA. Turned out that protein had a segment, a peptide, that undergoes self-assembly to form a nanofibers and form a hydrogel. That material turned out to be extremely good for wound healing. Okay, so NIH will not support this, and DARPA and Navy and Army supported that. Turned out this this product is a company become $1 billion company as yesterday. So you can see curiosity-driven research not only can generate knowledge for young people, keep ask questions all the time. That's what the Molecular Frontiers Inquiry Prize is about. You ask a question, you get a medal. You get to come here to spend time with the world prominent scientists. But also, the creative-driven discoveries can also generate new knowledge. The new knowledge eventually generate new technology and a new economy. Without asking the kind of curious questions, I would not be sitting here today. Okay, so new economy can be generated. And furthermore, MIT and Stanford and Caltech and so on, many great universities, they never ask us to study applied research. They confirm this. We were never asked to publish a paper with impact factor 5 and better. We were never asked to call the KPI, key performance indicator. Never asked for that. Yet, we're constantly doing curiosity-driven research. Stanford and MIT are the two basic examples how many billions, trillions of dollars the economy have generated by the two universities. It's amazing. And in the 2011 US Senate, salute MIT, because MIT by the time, 2011, founded 25,800 companies. Those companies generate revenues per year is $2.2 trillion. It's the 11th largest economy. I also read recently Stanford. It's about the same number. So between Stanford and MIT, the economy generated from the two universities. And it's incredible. And most people, throughout curiosity-driven research, never at once asked to do applied research. And now I come back to this funding business. Everybody talk national security. National security is important for individual nations, small country, big country, and so on. And U.S. has spent a lot of money for national security. But if we just take 10% of this money, apply for science, that will have tremendous impact for the world economy. And that everybody should also think about this. I actively advise my students to become politician, to run for the House, to run for Senate. My young student, and hopefully one of my students eventually will become politician and can influence this U.S. policies.
Thank you. I'm going to take Andreas' question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
I'd like to answer the panel's question about how do we engage more people in the scientific game without resources. And one of the things that I've found that really works well is when we scientists talk to public, is we acknowledge the fact that science is not a linear process. We acknowledge our failures. I have never had better connection with my audiences than when I explain to them something that I did that ended up being stupid. And I tried to do this, and it didn't work, and they love me after that. Because they understand that we are not perfect, and we always like to present science as if we knew exactly what was going to happen. We did all the experiments in linear fashion. We hide all the sausage making, and that doesn't help. It's very intimidating. The second thing that I found that the audiences really respond to is if you, instead of telling, if you speak in the form of questions, and if you say, imagine what would it look like if it was like this? And that instantly puts the brain into a more receptive case. And then you can go through the facts, and then you say, well, maybe, do you think it could be like this? And then you go through those facts. And I find that that's a better way of engaging. Finally, to conclude, I am too, just like Professor Tooth, I was and I still am very concerned about the powers of resurgent creationism and religion in the United States. They have museums now where they show humans riding on dinosaurs with saddles, okay, and having the dinosaurs with the reins. And these museums take millions of dollars. However, I want to end on a hopeful message. I think these are the last dying throes of this kind of medieval philosophy. And the only reason that they are resurgent is for the same reason that science is going to win. We have now much more access to ways of publicizing every opinion. There is internet, there is movies, there is everybody's got a webcam, everybody's got a web page. Right now, the Flat Earth Society has a website, active website, with 3,000 members. I bet you that didn't have 3,000 members 10 years ago. That doesn't mean the Flat Earth Society is going to win this conversation. All it means is that their voices have gotten louder. Politicians are dumb. They're looking to respond to the louder voices. But for every one of those, we have a Molecular Frontiers, we have TED Talks. If you go on YouTube right now, there's people like Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku and hundreds and hundreds of science popularizers. And you may not agree with everything they have to say. However, they are making the case very strongly with short little videos, and there's absolutely an abundance of these things. And an excellent exercise is to look at the comments that come down, and it's usually, there's a 10% people who say, you are the devil's spawn, you will all burn in hell because that's not what God said, la la la. And there's 90% of people who either make fun of the freaks, or they actually make very interesting, constructive comments. So I think that we're going to be okay.
I hope you're right.
Okay. Right. Well, I just wanted to say, we talked earlier and we're talking now about the communication of science. And when we were putting this program together, it has transpired to be more than I think any of us had even hoped for. You're all well known as excellent scientists, but you're certainly excellent communicators as well. And the intent of Molecular Frontiers is to stimulate and spread the message of science. And you've all done this wonderfully over these past couple of days. So I want to thank you so much, as well as thank all the audience participants who have been here. And now our chair of Molecular Frontiers, Bent Norden, would like to say a few words. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. I will not step up to the podium. I want to remain in the crew here. There's not so much to say. You know, you have to break when it's as best. And if I should give some advice to the young people here who I think will come back to us and come back to science, question is very important. You have already heard you should ask the right question. But maybe you should also question what you hear. There was one a Russian mathematician, I think it was Gamov, who had a paper on DNA where he cited himself 3 times, and then the 4th was another reference. And in the text, it said something rather peculiar. And he was asked later what this was about. And he said, well, if somebody says something 3 times, then it's true. And he wanted to refer to something that was true. You should not believe what you hear in media. You should think first. When you read a textbook, remember that the person who has written the textbook is very often not the one who has created the history. If you have time, if you are curious, you should go back to the original papers, whether it's Einstein or Schrödinger and so on, and you would find everything explained much more easy, sometimes at least, because the author of the textbook hardly has understood himself. And when he tries to explain something to you, it becomes screwed up. A textbook is often structured in a logical way. It starts with nucleic acids because the author wants to leave them. They are redundant. They are not so interesting. The proteins are the interesting things. And it's structured in such a way that you may think that biology has structured itself this way. You should question that. Of course, biology is not structured by logic. It's structured by some kind of tentative way of getting function. You see structures, and you can often deduce something about function, but not always. Very often you see crystal structures, because this is the only thing you can look at. People can show the crystal structure, but it doesn't always tell you about function, because function also contains dynamics. So if you see a photo of an engine in a car, maybe you can deduce how it functions, maybe not. Very often we have had surprises in science, surprises that we have awarded with Nobel Prizes. Just because people have believed the dogmas before, they have been sitting on a paradigm, something that determines what we know and so on. They haven't asked the right questions. And it is the persons who have asked the right questions or have stumbled over a discovery that makes them even more curious to dig in some corners that have made these discoveries and have been awarded. When I think about the cell, if I should make, I don't want to bet, but I have a feeling that the surprises in the future in biology will be that things that we, according to textbook, think have a certain function, they are also on other places and have other functions there. There are a few examples of this. But if you don't look for them in other places, you will never find them. And this is, of course, a very delicate balance. Should I look everywhere for everything, or should I first try to have a hypothesis about function? That depends on the problem. I think that the fact that we don't know everything, Andreas was on the point of this. I've noticed that among my students as well, that I say, we don't understand this. Then you see that they begin to think, could it be this or could it be that? And then you speak for hours. But this is true. We don't know anything. And I think this may be the common denominator for all our sciences. Biology is not everything. I'm interested in biology, but I'm also interested in what might be called fundamental physics. And I can't say that one thing is more important than the other. Biology, of course, it's related to medicinal science, it's related to things that very quickly could solve important problems. But there are other things. I would like, if I decide about how money is distributed, that we cannot confine ourselves to those areas that seem today be most yielding. How that should be done, I don't know. George Porter, Nobel laureate for kinetics, he was asked once about applied contra basic science, and he said there is only applied science and not yet applied science. So, but I would like to thank everybody, all the speakers here, and the audience who have been very active during the whole process, and in particular the people behind, one person leaving now, Magdalena, behind Molecular Frontiers Foundation, who are all volunteers, who are not paid, almost all of them yet, who are behind this fantastic symposium. And I agree, Shuguang, that this is probably the best one so far. Thank you, everybody.